Chapter 12. "Let's swap stories, Ellie," was the first suggestion out of Christy O'Keefe's mouth no sooner than he had gotten behind the wheel of the yellow VW Westphalia, fastened his seatbelt, touching the black rosary beads that dangled from his rearview window, presumably for good luck. "I'm not a superstitious person, mind you. It's just that what's natural and what's supernatural in this world is highly debatable. All depends on your particular belief in the order of things. Now, don't it? But getting back to my point, let's you and me swap stories." Christy reiterated his request with such sweet earnestness that Elspeth could only ask that genuine puzzlement. "Stories about what?" "About our lives, darling," he explained, as if stating the obvious. "About the moments in our lives that really mattered, when everything changed on a dime, when our poor hearts were broke, when our dreams were dashed, when our hopes seemed all but lost. Surely you have a story to tell me along those lines." The truth of the matter was that Elspeth indeed had such a story to tell, but it was a story she had never told anyone else before, save her daughter, Paloma, and her deceased husband, Francisco. It was the story of how a young and talented student from the University of Prague had been on her way to the Olympic Games in Mexico City one summer, when, in her absence, the Soviet invasion of her home country had occurred. It was a story of her panicked decision to subsequently go underground in Los Angeles and thereby to forsake forever her homeland and all that she had held dear. It was a story that originally, out of grim necessity, but eventually out of a comfortable habit, she had always preferred to keep secret. So why, then, did she find herself so freely telling it to Christy O'Keefe in a yellow VW Westphalia as they were driving south on Highway 101 en route to Los Angeles to attend the funeral of a mother of a friend of a friend? By what strange power he had managed to instill such uncharacteristic trust in a highly suspicious heart as Elspeth's was hard to say, but nonetheless it was true. And so, in the 2 hours it would take to drive to the Monterey County line, Elspeth would tell Christy the whole story and spare no gory detail. "I'd say you come through it all with flying colors, Ellie," Christy commented to her bravery as he pulled the Westphalia into a parking space in the shade of a rest stop on Highway 101 near Camp Roberts Army Base. "In fact, I'm sure such a Medal of Honor or a badge of courage just waiting for you on the other side. You were a brave girl, darling, no question, a real brave girl." Surprisingly overcome by emotion, there was no witty rejoinder that sprung immediately to Elspeth's mind, and not wanting to tarnish her reputation for bravery so soon as to put it at risk of accolades awaiting her in heaven by starting to cry at this inopportune moment, she instead hastily excused herself and headed off to the restroom, careful to avoid any rattlesnakes lurking unsuspiciously in the dry grass along the way. When she returned to the Westphalia, she could see Christy fast approaching from the opposite direction of the vending machines in the distance. Upon his return to the Westphalia, and after swinging himself lithely into the driver's seat, he revealed with undisguised delight the precious blunder, 3 Mars bars and 3 Milky Ways. "Figured we better stock up, Ellie. These ought to be the last of us till Buellton. Then we'll pull off again and get ourselves a bowl of that famous pea soup and a nice glass of milk." As the seemingly endless expanse of Monterey County now receded into the dim vastness that lay behind them, and the pastoral expanses of San Luis Obispo County stretched languidly up ahead to greet them, Christy O'Keefe slowly and methodically ruminated over a Mars bar before gesticulating with it in the air and declaring thoughtfully, "Don't think I can top that story, Missy, but I do think I can match it. Just bear in mind that every word of my story is true. I ain't making none of it up, so help me God." It's happened over some 20-odd years ago, I'd say, give or take. I was just out walking my dog on the beach, real peaceful and all, near where I was living in Big Sur, when out of nowhere, a big old sneaker wave sprung from out of the sea. It surged onto the beach, something awful, and knocked me down real hard. Afore I knew what was happening, it was surging right back to the sea again, but this time it was taking me with it. I couldn't fight it, Ellie. It was a force of nature near biblical proportions. It took me out real far, and at first I just bobbed on the surface of the sea. I could even make out my dog trying to swim out to me, but he couldn't. The sea wouldn't let him. Well, by that time, I was so freezing I couldn't even tread water no more. The sea was cold as ice, and I figured hypothermia was setting in. Thinking I was a goner, I just let myself sink under the surface, let go, and meet my maker, when out of nowhere I begun to feel something odd brushing against my leg. Next thing I knew, I was swimming underneath me, circles and bumping me up into the surface again. I got a good few breaths, and then it started thumping me on the back, thumping and pushing me to safety, always further down the coast. After a real concerted effort, it done brought me onto the beach, and only then could I see why my rescuer why it wasn't it just a harbor Caesar? Ellie, just before that seal took off back into the sea, it done stared straight at me, and then, with God as my witness, that seal spoke to me. I wouldn't lie to you, darling. As sure as I live and breathe, that seal looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "Great Pond is dead." And then I cast my gaze overhead, and I seen gathering of what appeared to be 1,000 seagulls, and they all at once commenced crying. So great was the lamentation that fell from the sky that day that I must have passed out from the sheer weight of it, 'cause all I can remember after that is waking up in a bed in community hospital 2 weeks later.